Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Mark Rye. I'm VP of Sales with Perram Corporation, and today we're going to be talking about corporate divestments and the information side of that divestment topic and how we go about preparing information holdings for turnover in the cases of divestment. And it's an interesting topic for us here because it's not one that we really set out to become the experts in, but one in which our clients have guided us into, I guess. Really, we come from a background of classifying files, applying metadata to large file repositories such as shared network drives, reorganizing content, cleaning it up, and then migrating it into SharePoint or an enterprise content management system. So we really understand file structures, folder structures, classification, and metadata, and we have technology and processes around that. But over the past couple of years, some of our clients, after having seen us do that kind of work, have said, you know what, we have a divestment coming down the pipe really quickly. I was wondering if the technology and process that you used to clean up our information holdings could be used to segregate files as part of that divestment. And that's really how we got introduced to the topic, and it's an interesting one. So we're going to get started here shortly. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see in the GoToMeeting sidebar, there's a questions section. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to enter them in there, and I'll check back from time to time and address those. All right, so we'll start off with a quick look at what's going on in the area of corporate mergers, acquisitions, and divestment. And what we're finding is that divestments are more common than ever. PricewaterhouseCoopers is estimating about 30% of all the deals that are being done in the M&A and divestment area are falling under divestment specifically. And they're seeing organizations that are divesting segments and divisions of their company or product lines. It's becoming more and more common. The reasons for that, I guess, as things become more competitive, organizations are looking to offload things that are, for example, not their core assets. They may be responding to market changes. Something that made sense for their business a few years ago might not now. Other organizations might simply be looking for financing to do other things with, so divesting certain business lines that will provide them with that financing. Or you may have an interesting product or service area which has high value, but to your organization, maybe you're just not executing on. So not having that internal talent to grow the business, so divesting it is a good way to capitalize that and move on. And then there's always the case where there's a completely unsolicited offer that comes in from a third party for a particular business line or product line. So it might not even be something that's on the agenda, but it will come in unsolicited. Now, the common model that's being used throughout North America for divestments is one in which litigation, unfortunately, can be a follow-on to divestment. So that divestment process will be taking place, and from the sale of the asset or the business line, long after the sale, there may be this opportunity for financial true-ups as more information is gained, or litigation as things don't pan out quite the way they were first painted as part of the sale. So that's really led organizations to do more sell-side due diligence. So understand what they're packaging up in order to mitigate that risk of something coming back after the sale and impacting the organization and the profitability of that sale of that asset. So where does information management come into all of this? So I think it's interesting to take a look at the difference between mergers and acquisitions, or the buy side of this kind of corporate activity versus the divestiture or the sell side. So I think most people that have worked with large companies that had been involved with mergers and acquisitions have seen a case where a particular business has been purchased and brought under the umbrella of a parent company, and that might have happened a year ago, might have happened 10 years ago, but that company is really operating still within the same information systems and really within a complete silo within the larger company. So when we're looking at M&A activity and the buy side of the activity, there's really no, other than good intentions, there's not a lot of motivation once that deal has been closed to actually integrate the information systems. Now, a completely different story when we're looking at divestiture. So on the sell side, absolutely the information assets are a key part of this overall deal. So segregating this business area off, completing the sale, we need to be able to transfer all of the information assets related to that. And not achieving that has serious implications, right? So either in terms of penalties that might come up in terms of the financial true-ups post-sale, or litigation, if key information wasn't turned over. So there's a real distinct motivators between the two. On the buy side, quite soft. On the sell side, with divestitures, it's really something that the IM information management side of things comes into play. In order to offset some of this, we're seeing seller diligence reports becoming more common. And a diligence report is really a third-party audit of your ability to separate a particular business area from your core holdings. And what this does, it essentially rates your ability for a potential buyer to evaluate, to say, okay, this looks like this deal can actually happen. They're prepared. We're going to get everything we need. And going through that level of diligence ahead of time, it's at the expense of the seller, but it can increase the value of the sale of that asset because there's real plan in place and it's been validated by a third party to say, yes, this makes sense. The organization's ready to divest. So how does all of this play into your information, where it is and how we prep it for turnover? That's what we're going to talk about. And when we're talking about information, really we're focusing on unstructured information. Structured information by its nature is going to be more friendly to deal with. When we get into the unstructured information, things get blended a lot more easily, and it becomes a much bigger issue to segregate the content again. So most organizations, they'll have some files sitting in an enterprise content management system. They probably have SharePoint. They might have e-rooms and other line of business file management systems, so maybe for engineering drawings or some sort of R&D. They might have cloud file repositories. And then, of course, the bulk, even after all of that, the bulk of their content is probably sitting on shared network drives or file shares, okay? And this is an area that we talk a lot about and we speak with a lot of organizations about. And through our information and the studies that we've done, we find that of the organizations that have an enterprise content management system, only about 16% of their content is there. The rest of it is across these other locations. So the ideal scenario would be 100% of your unstructured content is in your ECM system. It's all properly classified. It's all tagged with metadata. And when this notice of the divestment comes down, we simply go in and select the information that falls into the criteria we're looking for to peel it off and package it up. But the reality is that's not where most organizations are at. We also have, beyond the systems and the locations, we have this complexity of how are things organized. So when I say that, I mean, is there a consistent classification system being used across these repositories? or even within a repository. Is it functional based? Is it subject based? Or more commonly, is it some sort of hybrid that's just been evolved over time based on the business need? And again, because a lot of this is outside of the realm of ECM, kind of working at a pretty low-tech environment, it's just a series of folders, and we need to somehow sift through that and make sense of what content belongs where. So quite common, the news of a divestment, from what we've heard, can come with warning, or it can come with very little warning as well, especially in the case where an asset might not necessarily have been up for sale, but someone's made an unsolicited offer. So really, time is of the essence. Once the deal is in the works, especially, and then once it's signed, usually we're seeing somewhere around 90 days that our clients are looking for a turnover in packaging up their information assets for transfer to the buyer. And rarely do we see that there's a lot of consultation with IM or IT pre signing of the deal in terms of how we're going to do that. So it's a matter of the deal comes down, and then we scramble, or the organization scrambles to figure out, okay, how do we segregate this content and package it up? So the real heart of what we're talking about here is we need to package up all of the information related to the sale of the asset. So I shouldn't say sale, but related to the asset and the operation of that asset needs to be turned over. The tricky part is we need to segregate that from the corporate records that aren't going to go, because as you can imagine, the complexity lies in the fact that let's take just a shared drive as an example. There's likely content that needs to go to the buyer, content that needs to stay with the seller, and the seller's in that space there may be content from the seller around trade secrets, intellectual property, other proprietary information, planning, budgeting, R&D, whatever the case may be. It's going to be mixed in with a lot of junk, and the key is to figure out what stays and what goes, okay, without handing over any of this information that is obviously not something that we need to transfer as part of the sale of an asset. So the corporate proprietary information is what we need to ensure that we're not transferring, and that's really while we want to transfer the information required to operate the asset or the business, not transferring this corporate information is just as important to the seller. So how can we do this? What are some steps to follow? So in the projects that we've done, we've broken it down into these steps. First thing we need to do is inventory the information holdings. So what's in scope that needs to be examined? We need to assess the risk associated with each holding. We need to determine some keywords that are going to allow us to drive the file segregation, apply the keywords to the content, and validate the result of that with the business, and then as things look good, segregate the files and package for turnover. So inventory the holdings, what I mean by that are what repositories are there out there and which ones hold content specific to this business line or business area or division that's being divested, which hold intermixed content, so corporate info as well as that business line, and which are really corporate repositories which are unlikely to hold anything specific to that business area. So we want to build out a matrix of, if it's ECM, if it's SharePoint, if it's shared drive, let's start to understand what was specific to that business area and what's going to have, more importantly, what's going to have this intermixed content, because this is where the bulk of our efforts are going to be, is in the segregation of that intermixed content. Once we know what the repositories look like, what we're up against, then we can do some risk assessment. And the risk assessment is really about having some subject matter experts along with the information and records management team look at the holdings of the content and identify which of these types of risks or other types of risks exist in the turnover of content. So in this package that we're prepping for movement to the buyer, could there potentially, if we just turned it over as is there potentially information in there that represents a reputational risk for the corporation, competitive risk, something that we're giving away? Are we showing anything around our operational expertise? Corporate directives and directions that we don't want to pass along. Certainly R&D, anything along those lines. And then specific to your business, you're going to have specific areas that you're going to want to address. But we really need to assess these holdings and say, okay, what's the likelihood of content in here creating this kind of risk for the organization in terms of turnover? Then based on that, what we're going to want to do is develop a list of keywords. And the keywords are going to help us identify and segregate the content into two piles. So one bucket being the bucket that goes to the buyer, and one bucket, the bucket that stays with the seller. And what we want to do when I think about these keywords, if your information management program has invested the time and energy into defining a metadata model and a fairly granular metadata model, these keywords may come off of that, or a good number of them may come off of the controlled vocabulary of your metadata model. But really what we're talking about is, for this division or business area, what are things like facility names and locations and product codes or product names that are unique to that part of the business, so that when we see those in the content, we can identify those as things that need to go to the seller, or sorry, to the buyer. Okay, so we're going to work out and develop what those keywords are. The next step is to then obviously apply the keywords to this intermixed content and see what we get. So upon doing that, we're going to be flagging files that are identified for turnover, and we'll have files that have been identified then on the other side to stay with the organization. And the first pass at this will probably see that some tweaking is needed. So in this sort of exercise, it's certainly a couple of iterations of this are going to be required, because we're trying to create this unique keyword list against an unknown set of content, and something that may seem correct at first, maybe getting false positives on, the corporate content, so we might need to refine that. So we'll go through a couple of iterations of running these keywords to the point where, yes, we can see this definition being created between the content that stays and the content that goes. The next step is really to validate this segregation with the business. So have them come in, again, after it's run and as these iterations are being done, help them refine the keyword list, add additional keywords if certain content we feel is not being caught, and then go beyond the keywords. So keywords might not be everything, and just make some obvious browse into the content and help make some decisions around, oh, that definitely needs to go, that definitely needs to stay. So the keywords and the technology are part of this, but the human element can't be removed. It's an important part as well. So the RIM team, the Records and Information Management team, is really going to be looking to these subject matter experts within the business to be able to help guide what stays and what goes. So that's going to be a key part of this preparation of the content for turnover. Just going to take a quick look into the questions panel. I don't see anything there yet, so we'll continue on with the presentation. But as we're coming up, you know, in the last 5-10 minutes here, feel free to enter anything in, and that way I'll address that at the end of the presentation. The next step is obviously to segregate the actual file. So based on this flagging that we've done through the keyword analysis and working with the SMEs from the business area, we're going to actually have the technology separate the files. And one thing we've learned over a course of a number of projects is take a look at a particular holding, how things are being flagged, and then determine, move the smaller portion. So if 80% in this example, if 80% is flagged for turnover, well, you could leave that 80% there and pull off the 20% that's staying corporate, or vice versa, so that the technology and that migration type process is streamlined as much as possible, so that we're moving smaller bits of content. Just makes sense. And finally, I guess again, back to the biggest challenge of it all, is we need to get through this process in about 90 days. And for many of these types of divestments, that might include, well, many different repositories, different systems, and certainly millions of files, if not tens of millions of files, may be involved. So it's certainly a big job with a tight timeline. What we find with clients is the lack of readiness is really the biggest challenge. So if you're ready to hit the ground running day one, it's all achievable. If day one you're thinking about how you might do it, quickly it becomes unachievable. And by unachievable, the result of unachievable typically is turning over information you don't want to turn over. So having information walk out the door that would have been best to have peeled off and kept within the confines of the organization. So what can we do to prepare ahead of time? So if there's no divestment imminent, what can we do? Well, we can take a look at the business and the different business areas that you have, and start to make note and analyze what is potential for divestment. So what product lines, what business areas, how does your business map out into segments that could be segregated through this sort of corporate divestment? Also, we can start to keep an inventory of the repositories for unstructured information that these different business areas are using. So, are some areas solely in an ECM system? Are some businesses areas using SharePoint? Or, what are these repositories that we're being associated with the different businesses? And then again, as I mentioned earlier, we can start to think about keywords for each business area, and start to think about, if you've developed a metadata model, how that might be used, and if that controlled vocabulary for the metadata model, how would that, just start to work through that. How would that line up in segregating content in terms of a divestment? And even ahead of time, by doing some of that analysis, you might be able to say, okay, it's going to be short in these kinds of areas, so either proactively or on the fly, we would know that we would need to build it out in certain areas, but at least we have a starting point. And lastly, we can identify resources and technology that are going to be required. So knowing that we may be up against millions or tens of millions of files, and we may have a timeline 60, 90, 120 days, somewhere around there, how are we going to get it done? So what is really at your disposal from a resources point of view? I am in IT. What kind of support would you need from the business to be able to validate and help develop these keywords? And then when would you need, or what sort of external resources might you need to supplement your team? So essentially know what you can do and know where you're going to run out of time and energy. And then along with that, what technology is going to be needed to actually act on this. So the act of separating by keywords, validating, and then doing the segregation. Is there technology in-house, or have some thought around a plan for that technology and how it would be used? So those are some general thoughts around the area of divestment and divestment planning from an IM perspective. Perram Corporation, obviously, as I mentioned off the top, we've done a number of these projects. From a technology perspective, what our clients like is we bring the technology to the table. We operate the technology. You don't need to learn it, and you don't need to license it either. So you procure our services for the project, and we just bring the technology in and use it. So it's not a whole separate technology procurement that you need to go through, or training process that you need to learn. And lastly, we walk the client through all of these steps that we just identified from start to finish, and we can do it, and we have done it in this 60, 90-day range for clients, right? So to fall within the required timeline of their divestment and their turnover of information. So everything from starting the project, understanding the repositories we're up to, building out the keyword list, running it in some iterations, validating that with the business, and then going forward, and once we're confident in that flagging, segregating the files and creating the turnover package to go to the buyer. So hopefully that gives you some insight into the area of information management, how we see it touching on this more and more common area of divestment that we're seeing. I'm going to flip over and just see if there's any questions that have been entered. If you have any, feel free to do so at this point. We'll stick around for a minute. If any pop in, I'll be sure to address them. And if you don't have any, and you'd like to drop off at this point, I appreciate your time in listening to the presentation. If you'd like to learn more about our services in this area, feel free to get in touch, and we'll be glad to provide that information for you. All right, we are just past time. I don't see any questions being entered in at this point, so I think we'll close things off. Again, I appreciate everyone's time. I hope you have a great day, and feel free to contact us if you'd like to dive deeper into the topic. Thanks.